This is Paul Johnson with The Independent. Now, this week, we're going to talk about a historic issue that's taking place in Arizona, and that is we have an independent candidate running for governor, Hugh Lytle. Hugh gave his speech, and we're going to play some of the clips from that speech, but this is historic because effectively, we've never had an independent governor in Arizona, and this is a serious one. Hugh has a great background in business. He has been focused on the idea of healthcare and working hard on the healthcare issue. He was once a quarterback for ASU, Arizona State University. He's kind of a Reagan Republican with a heart. Maybe a better way to frame it. A long time ago, a friend of mine put it this way. He's a bleeding heart capitalist. You're going to like this guy. Now, he's not on our show today. We are going to get him on our show in the future, but we're going to talk about his speech and what it was that took place during his announcement. And finally, I just want you to know that we're working really hard in the Arizona Independent Party to try to make certain that we create equal access for independents. In Arizona, if you want to run for governor, you need 6,000 signatures as a Democrat, 6,000 as a Republican. You need 45,000 signatures as an independent. Our independent party changed that. But I can tell you, the reason those numbers exist is because the two parties have tried to block them out of the process. They've tried to block out their voice, and they've tried to block out their vote. We're trying to make that change. I'm just an ordinary, optimistic American who really believes that the United States is still a great cause for good, and that all the problems that we have that are caused by mankind can be solved by mankind. In any event, if you like what it is that we're doing here, press that subscribe button. Let's get on with the show.
Destiny. Destiny. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. 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 You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
All right, guys, I'm glad to have you back here with us. We're going to take on some fun topics today. The first one that we're going to talk about is going to be the new independent who announced for governor. And then we're going to talk about some of the controversial issues we're seeing going on around the country, what's happening in Minnesota as well as in Greenland. I'm not quite sure how they're connected, but they seem to be this week. But before we do that, let me go around the panel and just say hi to everybody and get a little update from them. Henry, how are you and your family and baby Arthur doing? How's college? College kids doing?
Everything's good.
Professor?
Everything's good. We're in the third week of the semester, so things are pretty busy on campus. I hosted a workshop on Saturday for about 8 junior scholars that we flew in from all over the country to get feedback from more senior political scientists on their work, and that was a lot of fun. I was just telling Bob before we got started about how impressive the latest generation of political scientists are. I would never have gotten a job as a professor if I'd had to compete against these guys.
Yeah, it's fun to watch young people because I listen to all my friends and our stereotypes. I'm 65. I listen to the stereotypes all the time. And then I'll go back and meet with a group of young people and say, this isn't really nearly as bad as we keep thinking it is. There are a lot of young people that have incredible promise that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in my field, the discipline, it's like any scientific discipline, it moves so fast. And even though I'm only, I guess I'm regarded as a mid-career scholar, I already feel like a lot of what I'm doing is totally out of date, which is the way it should be. That's the way it should be. That's how science is supposed to work. You do some work and it's cutting edge for about 6 months and then things have moved on. And so, it's great. It's great. We've got a great group of young people coming through in political science, no question.
All right, Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks.
Family all doing well?
Everybody's doing quite well, except I've got family in the Portland area and family in Rochester, New York. So they're all getting frozen to death.
Yeah.
Even in Portland?
Yeah, they've had some intemperate weather, lots of chilly winds and chilly rain.
All right, so here's my big story of the week. It's right here. I can pick it up barely. So last week, I'm walking my dog up through the mountains, and I have to put a leash on him because he kind of goes crazy when other dogs will come around. I can't just let him go free. He won't follow instructions. And sure enough, we run into another lady with a little dog, and he kind of goes crazy. And I'd like to tell you it was some big heroic story, but basically it was like he just got me a little bit discombobulated. One size 14 foot fell over the other size 14 foot. And before I knew it, I'm falling. And I probably would have been okay falling on my wrist if a 200-pound butt hadn't landed on top of it and ended up breaking it. So I ended up having to go to the hospital, and I went into a little bit of shock. And as it gets done, I have to now go do a surgery next week. And all of this is in the middle of a whole variety of things I have going on in my business and the political party. We have a candidate for governor who's announcing, which we're going to talk about today. And I've spent a pretty active role, not only in his campaign, but 5 other campaigns as well of people who are trying to get their cells started. So I've had an eventful week. The good news is I've had to take a little bit of drugs. So I'm not a drug guy. Like you give me the least tiny amounts of drugs and it has big, huge effects on me because I don't take aspirin. But that's going to be my excuse for if I say something completely crazy today. Now, we have an insider into the candidate who's running for governor as an independent. By the time this show airs, his speech will have been given. He's going to announce his speech tomorrow, sometime around 10 o'clock, and then he's doing a tour all around the state. But this insider gave us a copy of his speech. And so because we have the speech, we're going to be able to give comments on him. And about the time that his speech is given, we'll be able to be the first people that are critics. And I don't know if there's if it matters when you're kind of first to the deal, but nonetheless, that's what we're going to get to do.
Hi, my name is Hugh Lytle, and I'm running for governor of Arizona. So people ask, who is this guy? So let me tell you a little bit about myself. Moved here 30 years ago. Met my wife here. I'm married to her for 27 years, and we've raised 3 amazing children. I'm an entrepreneur, best known for my company, Equality Health, which brings high-quality health care to diverse and underserved communities in Arizona. And now I'm looking at other things in my life and saying, what's most important to me? I came here about 30 years ago as a quarterback for Arizona State University and fell absolutely in love with this state. But wow, things have changed since then. For starters, affordability. From 2007 to 2017, the cost of a college education has more than doubled, which is just unaffordable for young people today. How does a family even begin to own a home these days? You might be in your 30s and 40s before you ever even get your first starter home. And that's unacceptable. It's like wages have stayed local and home prices have gone coastal. And look, healthcare is complex. I've spent a career building companies, working nationally across all types of government healthcare. Problems aren't easy, but there are ones you can control. I'm a disruptor, I'm an innovator, and I'm someone that I believe can change the face of government. I'm looking for that opportunity in November.
So let me, what I'd like to do is I'd like to pick your guys' brains on this just to get your input. And I'm going to walk through a couple of the different components and let me know kind of how you felt about it. But if we can, why don't we just start with your overall opinion of the speech itself? Bob, I'll start with you.
Well, Mr. Insider, to the extent announcement speeches are politically meaningful, which is to a very minimal extent. It's primarily because of thematic characteristics. A general statement is the case for this particular candidate to be elected. And frankly, I thought that the speech missed the central opportunity for a third-party candidate in this particular election cycle. The speech talks about a revolution, revolutionary ideas, radical ideas, disruptive ideas. And my sense in terms of the electorate that might be available to a third-party candidate is that what they want most in politics right now is a little stability and peace. You've got the Trump daily chaos at the national level. At the state level, and this is a candidate for governor, you've got a constant partisan battle going on between the governor and the MAGA legislature. And so I think that the central offer that a third party candidate might give is, let's return to a little bit of peace and stability rather than we want a revolution, disruptive ideas, and radical concepts. I frankly don't think that what's in the speech adds up to that. But thematically, I thought it was kind of a missed opportunity.
I think I disagree a little with Bob because I quite like the upbeat, optimistic tone of the speech. I only read it. I didn't see the video, but what resonated with me the most was the idea that he wants to move the state forward, that he wants to move beyond gridlock. I think he probably could have pointed the finger at the other political parties a little bit more for creating the gridlock. Might have been a more compelling message, but I thought there was a good, upbeat message to the speech overall. I think it was a little bit missing on some of these strategic questions, the big strategic questions about where the candidate is positioning themselves. It sounded at times like he was kind of like a libertarian, which I think is a problematic place for the candidate to end up because there's already a libertarian party in Arizona and he could kind of get labeled the wrong way. But I think that in general, the upbeat tone was good. And I think that as far as these things go, as Bob says, take it with a grain of salt. There's still a lot of water to go under the bridge before the election. I think as far as these things go, to set just a general optimistic, upbeat tone is not such a bad thing at all.
Yeah, and I will start by telling you what I think is important about an introductory speech. You're introducing somebody. You're trying to give people a filter. And the reason for the filter is that, you already have a filter if you're a Democrat or Republican. Already kind of sitting there. You kind of know. You might have to, as a candidate, you might have to debunk some of those things that will come out of the filter. But as an independent, you have to really establish you're an independent. What does that mean? And why are you there? To Bob's question about a revolution, the point that we're trying to make is a mixture between, I think, both of what you said, Henry, and Bob said, which is if you're optimistic, that is revolutionary. If you believe you can focus on problems and fix the big challenges, that's revolutionary. The goal is to have a revolution of optimism. But let's kind of go to the first section. We've had discussions on this show about it. And so, I don't know, maybe we missed the point. I'd like to see again what you guys think. I will separate the speech into 4 sections and I'll try to talk about each one individually. And the first one I'll talk about is the idea of being a problem fixer. Hugh has a background. He's worked in he's started and founded 3 different healthcare companies. There is no more complex an area to work in a company than healthcare. There are 27 different acts of Congress that regulate it. There are so many rules. It's incredibly hard to overcome the regulations that are there. And then he worked in his last one on something that worked on Medicaid. But early on, he worked on preventative things that ended up resulting in, he was one of the creators and founders, not by himself, but when he was the president of the company, he worked on putting together a silver sneakers program. Point is this, he likes tackling hard issues. And I can tell you, when working with him through this process, that was the thing that he was much more focused on. He is not a politician. He is a CEO. You can sense that when you work with him. He likes talking about first principles, what are true, strip away the things that we know that aren't true, and let's deal with the ones that are true. And that kind of got you down to the problems that he wanted to focus on. But there was an attempt in the very early part of the speech to talk about fixing big problems. Bob, because of your comments, do you think we missed the mark on that?
Not in terms of how he initially positioned himself in citing his business background. I think that the policies that are included in this speech don't add up to tackling big problems particularly comprehensively or well, and in many cases, I think, are misdirected. But in terms of where his energy is going to be focused, I think in addition to a little political peace and stability, there is a desire for elected officials that focus on problem solving rather than scoring partisan brawling points against the other side. And I think his recitation of his background gave credence to that being the sort of leadership that he will try to provide the state.
I've said for quite a long time that I think if you want to run an independent candidate, you need one issue. I think that he should have one issue as a signature issue. Of course, he can have many different policy proposals, but it would be very useful if he had one issue. And I think what that issue is obviously up for debate. If it was up to me, I'd probably say primary and secondary education. K through 12 education is probably the biggest sticking point in the state. Of course, employment, really important as well, given the slipping of the state back down the rankings recently. And he does talk about those points, but I think that to make the candidate really stand out and to get the traction that he needs as an independent candidate, he obviously has a really interesting background. He's different from any of the other candidates, right, who are going to be seen as career politicians and are going to be seen as entrenched in their respective parties, which they are. But if he had a signature policy as well, I think that would help him to cut through a lot.
Okay, and we're going to get to the policies in a minute because I do want to go through them, but I want to get to what I thought was the next point, which was he was trying to lay out we don't know. Again, when you look at the independent candidate, what's the filter? What's the ideology that they're playing out? And one of the things that happens with independents, they're less ideological. But if you get to know him, he's an interesting guy. I would call him a Reagan Republican with an incredible conscience, or a bleeding heart capitalist. Right? There's a number of different names that you could apply to him. But one of the things that I liked that he said during the policy discussions was that two people he liked were Milton Friedman and Martin Luther King, and that there actually could be a combination of both of them because they both focused on the idea of the individual. That's something that I've been promoting. I promoted it in a book that I have. But his concept is that, that there's no reason why we can't have civil rights, equal rights, and human rights, as well as property rights, free markets, free trade, free enterprise. He was trying to give you a filter to understand how he sees issues. Again, do you think we missed the mark on that or made the mark, Henry?
It's funny because when you talk about that, that to me sounds like kind of what Bob wants. Something very middle of the road, almost like the sort of third way neoliberal consensus that we thought we had until 2016. And so maybe some of this is just a question of framing and how people perceive these things. But someone who commits to, things like private property rights, foundational American values around individual liberty, and then certain foundational civil rights values around racial equality. I see absolutely nothing controversial about that. I almost think that it runs the danger as being seen as boring. But then again, that's what Bob wants, so maybe that's good.
Bob's not boring. He's
not boring. He just wants boring politicians.
Yes,
yes, that's true. He's not boring, but the people he likes are boring. Anyway, Bob, your thought?
Historically, Henry is right. The success of an independent candidacy has tended to be driven by a major issue that was the focus of it. You've seen that very dramatically occur in the United Kingdom and the rise of the four-age various parties. He's had different parties, but it all was on the basis of primarily immigration. I think we're in a different moment. Usually history prevails, but I think that what there's an opening for an independent candidate to provide is a much broader approach to governing than we are getting from our two major political parties. And I think that part of his speech did convey a sense that he was looking for a different, more eclectic approach to governing and public policy, and borrowing some things from the progressive set of values and other things from the conservative set of values, and saying that we can blend those. And I do think that has some appeal with what I think is a fairly unique opportunity for an independent candidate in Arizona in 2026.
Yeah, and I would also tell you, it's the area of the gap voter, or what I call the gap voter, the voters that are being left behind by the two parties. And I'm not just talking about independents and unaffiliated. I'm talking about people in their own party. So as an example, we've spoken on this show in the past about Nikki Haley and how she gained 20 or 20, Bob will remember the number, 24% of the vote, even though she wasn't running anymore. She hadn't stuck with the election. Well, the group of people that are being abandoned by the current Republican Party are the Reagan Republicans. They try to act as if that's not true, but it just is true. I mean, every week we watch Trump come out with some new issue. I mean, this week he's buddies with Elizabeth Warren. I mean, it blows my mind, right? But he's going after the bad banks, and he's going after the bad home builders and the people who are building rental housing. Those are liberal strategies. I've been saying for a long time, this guy is going left. But in moving in that direction, he's abandoning people who believe in free trade and free markets and free enterprise and smaller government. The Democratic side, I think the reason for using Martin Luther King, they've abandoned his principles. It's really no longer about this concept of we shouldn't be judged by the color of our skin, but instead by the content of our character. And on the Democratic side, it has become identity politics through and through. They're much more interested in focusing not on how do we get to equality, but how do we get to equity in terms of outcomes. And that concept, there are many Democrats who do not agree with that, who love the idea of being focused on civil rights and what Martin Luther King talked about. But they also see that there is a horseshoe effect that's going on here. I mean, Trump's gone so far right, he's a communist. I know that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but he's way over there on the left side. And you can listen to guys like Bell talking about critical race theory. One of the things he advocated for on the left was we shouldn't have integration. We shouldn't have the races being mixed. These kids should be able to be separate. You can watch them on the two extremes go so far that they abandon their actual base of voter. I think that was the point he was trying to make. I'll let you guys have any other comments on that if you'd like.
Paul, I think that raising identity politics is a really important point, because one of Americans' most salient identities is their party identification, right? And part of the independent party pitch is that there's enough people who don't have a strong enough party ID in the middle there to vote for an independent. And I think we've still got a lot of water to go under the bridge before the election. And I think that some of the events we're going to talk about in a few minutes illustrate that people could be pushed by events back into their party identification camps. Like, for example, when I see what's happened in Minneapolis, where you have a lot of people who are probably relatively moderate on the immigration issue and maybe even relatively moderate on Trump's immigration policies, I think a lot of those people in suburban Minneapolis have been pushed very far against Trump and his immigration policies and into their Democratic Party ID, right? So there's a lot of polarization that could still occur before the election, which would be bad for any independent candidate. It probably would also be bad for the country. We can talk about that later, but it would certainly be bad for an independent candidate. And, when you see the way that these events are playing themselves out, it can happen really fast.
No doubt about it. And the more people are afraid, the more they gravitate towards their tribe for safety.
Exactly. And the more that they see, the more that voters see that the other side is mobilized, the less willing they're going to be to vote for a moderate independent candidate. If you lean only slightly Republican and you see that the Democrats are highly, highly mobilized around a specific issue or a specific event, then you're much more likely to yourself hew towards the Republican rather than an independent, because you see that the Democrats are turning out their voters and you need to stop them, right? These are the sorts of partisan dynamics that could ramp up or be tamped down in the next few months that are going to be probably very decisive for the fate of an independent candidate.
I see it potentially differently, that the more polarized our politics become, the more people are going to be looking for a way out of what seems an endless cycle of hardened partisan sentiment. Meanwhile, nothing gets done that people want done. So it may play out the way that Henry suggested, but I think it also might strengthen the argument that we need a way out of this. This isn't a good way to run a country. This isn't a good way to run a state. And we need to break free of what are destructive, divisive politics and what it's yielding to us.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of suggests that the best path forward is going to depend a lot on events, right? If you continue to have like a doubling down of these Minneapolis type situations, then maybe the better pitch for the independent candidate becomes something about reject the polarization, vote for me. It all depends on how things go down, but there's still a lot of water to go under the bridge in terms of events between now and the election.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to what's happening in Minneapolis today, because I think that's a really important issue. And not only does it affect the independent, it's affecting the entire country, and it's an incredibly important issue. But before I do, we talked about trying to frame this around one idea. Obviously, I mean, I'm not an objective bystander watching this whole thing, just trying to give opines on it. You two guys fit into that category. I don't. I'm on a side. And I've been actively engaged in the campaign as they crafted this message. If they were to pick one idea, here's what it would be. There's no place like the United States. That's the starting point. We're the most upwardly mobile country in the history of the world. There's no country that's done more for human progress than we have. There's an incredible amount of optimism in terms of who we are. But there's also a fear. And here's the fear. It kind of relates to what we've talked about on this show. There was a book written called The True Believer by Eric Hoffer, where he talks about the concept of, are we going to have a revolution from within? And the point that he made is that revolutions don't happen. He studied them because people were saying that we were going to have a communist revolution from within in the 1950s, and he disagreed. He said revolutions don't happen because people have a lot and they want more. They don't happen because people have nothing and want something. They don't even. So what they happen from is they happen from a group of people who have something and lose a piece of it. And he says, here's the sign to look for when you have to worry about a revolution. When we get to a generation of Americans who feel like they won't do as well as their parents did. That's their concern. And he said, that is the spark of any revolution. And he said, regardless of where it goes, that's the thing to worry about. Now, my own personal opinion, if you actually look at the data is a lot better than how this message is coming out. But nonetheless, it is an important message that we have to deal with. And in a couple of areas, I think last week we talked about this apex between the Standard and Poor's moving up at a regular basis, and at the same time, new job openings went down. There's a sense amongst many young people that they may not be able to work in the field that they're being trained in, that AI may displace them. That's an issue. Another issue is there's no doubt if they don't get into assets, absolutely no doubt about it, they won't keep up. There's no way that wage growth is going to keep up with actual net worth. The only way to get that is through the ownership of assets, whether it's stocks or bonds. Generally, though, it's real estate. We've created huge incentives in this country for people to get into real estate, but that is increasingly becoming more difficult. The cost of a college education, the amount of debt that students have to take on, whether or not there's a value to that, those are big, big challenges. And we'll talk about the solutions that he talks about on those in a moment, but that's the big problem that he's identifying. Now, in talking a lot to him, look, this is a dad who is worried about his kids, and he's worried about the young people that are around them. And that is it's interesting because oftentimes voters don't really care about the next generation. They care about themselves and the challenges that they're facing. And so maybe that one doesn't work. But I know that if you went to his passion, what's the problem we should work on? That's the one he's most concerned about. Maybe that didn't come through, especially in listening to your comments in the speech, but I'd love to have your thoughts on it. Bob, I'll start with you.
I think it is a salient political issue that does resonate beyond just the generation that is concerned, because they have parents and they have grandparents, and we have seen what our children are confronting. I think that it's not a comprehensive problem. I think you've got a temporary problem in the job market because of the declining population growth in the United States. So you're going to see a decline in new jobs created. For the most part, we have stable unemployment to the extent that it is higher among the younger generation. I think it's due to the uncertainty in the Trump economy, from tariffs and attacks on the independence of the Fed. I think that's a temporary phenomenon. The two that are not temporary, that are more institutional, is the high cost in terms of student debt for many professionals. And we do need to talk about reducing both the time invested and the cost of getting credentialed for white-collar jobs. We do that in a very inefficient and costly way presently, and that needs to change. And the ability to afford a home early in your life rather than when you become middle-aged. And to me, that is a pure supply-side problem. There's nothing that you can do about it on the demand side that will have any broad-based, meaningful effect. You've got to blow apart the restrictions on building new housing and the kind of housing for which there is a demand, which is it switches, it shifts over time. So I don't think it's a revolutionary inducing problem, but there are two structural issues in terms of the time invested and the cost of credentialing for a white-collar job, and the tying up on the supply side of building housing to meet demand.
Bob, I'm going to ask you a question just because I thought about it here. There are a number of people at our age group, we're about the same age, and the word revolutionary is a sticking point to them. It's not the first time I've just heard that concept. Did it bother you when it was the Reagan Revolution?
No, I was in favor of the Reagan Revolution. I would be in favor of a variety of different revolutions now. But in terms of the opportunity for an independent candidate in the 2026 election, I don't think revolution is what the potential voter is looking for. They've had plenty of disruption.
They want a break.
Yeah, they want a break. They turn to sound governance and making politics boring again.
I don't know if we can sell this point. We'll see. But I think the point is, that is, again, what's revolutionary. Look, if you want to stay on the current divide, there was nothing in his comments that threw mud at the other candidates on either side of the equation. There was nothing in here that talked about how bad a world that they've created. To me, the Reagan Revolution, I kind of went through it. You know this. I was a Democrat running in in a very Republican district. I had this hat that used to say Reagan Johnson Leadership for Arizona. God, it used to make people on the Republican side mad at me. I was like 23 years old with this hat on. But the point was, man, he was optimistic. You could do all other types of things, but you just had this sense he believed in us. And that was a powerful thing, especially coming out of the 1980s when, Carter was right. There was a malaise. There was a sense of deep depression about who we were. And he gave us a sense of being something better. So in any event, Henry, your same thought. Do you think that we made the point or missed the point on that single idea? And how do you see that major focus?
I think these are important ideas, important problems, public policy problems, really difficult ones. A lot of people are talking about at the moment. Higher education really is in a crisis. This is a moment where you can reshape universities and higher education for sure, because things have changed so fast between declining enrollments and then the declines in federal research funding. A lot of universities are in really big trouble. Now, whether that means that people want an AI-powered degree instead of something different, I think it's hard to say. If it was up to me, I would more, as a governor, take an agnostic stake on what the future of higher ed is supposed to look like, but basically insist that there are more options and different options for people within the state. The housing policy thing, I don't really have a lot to add. If I'm going to be perfectly frank, I think the housing debate is kind of intractable at this point. And if I was a governor candidate, I'm not sure that I would want to take ownership of that problem, quite frankly, because I'm not sure that a governor can really move the needle that much. Perhaps in a small way in specific geographies and specific areas, but when you've got, mortgage interest rates play such a huge role, you've got all these state units, the different cities with all their different regulations that we've discussed so many times on the program. It's a pretty difficult one for a governor to really be able to demonstrate a lot of progress. So personally, if I was running for governor, I would just heap blame on everyone else for creating the problem and gesture at a solution rather than hanging my hat on it and saying,
you said no. You and Bob both said no to me.
That's not true, Paul. That's not true. I insisted that Bob and I would be willing to run in the primary for dog catcher, all right? That's on record. There's a recording of that somewhere on the podcast.
Yes, there is. I can go back and find those minutes. I remember when I asked. Just for the record, you guys didn't step up when I made the offer. Okay, so let's tackle these issues, each one of them individually. You mentioned a couple of them, but I'm going to kind of dismiss one first, unless you guys want to talk more about it. And I don't want to underplay its importance, but it was incredibly important to Hugh as we were going through these things that there was a belief the government can't solve these problems by itself, and that we need to do more work with the not-for-profit industry and with the private sector, trying to get them to step up in a variety of different ways. The one that I liked the best was his Mentor Corp, which is the idea that you get businesses and people who would like to be entrepreneurs and connect them together. Now, we've had a number of people. He made mention of this in the speech, but Sarah Smallhouse worked with me on the issue of the open primaries, and has a foundation. She's given a lot of money to education. She's tried to create these programs, and the challenge isn't getting the kids who want to take part in it. The problem is getting the companies and others that will open up spots to let them in. And that's a place or a role that he thinks a governor could play. And I think he's right. I think they can. But I'm going to set that group of issues aside. For some people, they feel soft. But for him, he thinks that way too often people forget the idea that a governor isn't just the governor of the government, that he can play a role in trying to engage the private sector. And that's something that he feels very passionate about doing. But let's go to the ones that have a little bit more deeper controversy and public thought into them. And I'll start with the one that you mentioned, which is the university degree. Now, the university degree, Hugh's idea is, look, we have to show people why AI is a benefit, not a negative. There are a lot of areas that it's a benefit. One of the areas it's going to be a benefit is healthcare. It's going to dramatically change our ability to deal with medicines and our ability to deal with providing healthcare and making healthcare more affordable. But we oftentimes forget that. We only look at the negatives of what are happening. We may wipe out the DWI industry because of AI technology. What's happening in our cars and the ability to have them drive themselves. As I broke my hand, it's Elon driving me all around town. And it is amazing. It literally finds the parking spot to park in my Tesla. But one of the areas that he's talking about is what's going on in upper education, and mainly because young people are struggling with that. Now, I don't think he wants to replace upper education. One of the things that was clear to us and the experts that we spoke to, there is a huge value in the socialization aspects of a college education as well. And not just socializing so you get to know how to work with other peers and talk to people, but the idea that you can have more discussions about the programs that you're working on and the ideas that you're working on. And it makes it more exciting and interesting to have communication and discussion. So there's an understanding that there's still going to be a formal education that is going to be important. But it's also clear that we're going to need a lot of retraining. We're going to need people to be able to shift jobs a lot faster than we used to. And as we looked at that issue, one of the things that we saw is that the ability even to change curriculum is extremely difficult for our universities and colleges, partly because of the regulatory and bureaucratic environment that's there. And, a little bit of that is the Board of Regents in terms of how fast they are willing to make changes. But another part of it is the ability to make certain that industry is actually playing a role. And the AI dividend here that's possible is there's no doubt in the AI industry, there's an ability with AI information to be able to dramatically change a degree. Maybe it's 2 degrees or 3 different types of degrees. But our goal would be, oftentimes there's a great book called The Innovator's Dilemma. If you like Clayton Christensen, I love him. He talks about the challenge of disrupting your own industry, right? Like if you have a company and you want to disrupt it and you try to put together the group to do it, it won't work. He said it's extremely hard to make it work because the old institution fights the new growth. And so oftentimes innovation only happens when you create something that's on the outside. But I'm going to make a point here. ASU is one of the most creative, innovative institutions, I think, in the country. Dr. Crow's been amazing at adopting innovation. Our goal is to see if we can create a moonshot, or his goal, Hugh's goal, to create a moonshot to get a $99 degree or $99 a semester, meaning the price is de minimis now. You don't have to have a loan, but to see if we can engage the AI industry along with our universities and their professors to find a way to make that degree more affordable. Henry, I'm going to start with you. Do you think that's a silly idea? Do you think that it's has possibility? How would you grow upon it, or would you abandon the idea altogether?
Big question. So I think the role of AI in higher education is still super unclear. I think that there's definitely going to be a major role for the technology in the students' careers. Students are already using it to do or help with their assignments, etc. The question, well, there are many, many questions, but the question I'd say right now is how do you integrate it into existing degree programs that, as you say, already exist? It's hard to change degree programs as they stand. How can you integrate AI into the degree program so that when students graduate, they're used to working with AI, they can adapt to new AI models, etc., without compromising on the skills that they would otherwise have learned in their degree programs, which I think are still really important. And I don't think that ASU or many universities have a really clear plan on that because the technology is changing so fast and we aren't that fast on responding. But universities are going to respond, and I think that AI will be integrated into our usual degree programs as something that's just used the same way that Google Scholar is used, and the same way that online repositories of data, etc., are already used, right? We're just going to probably integrate AI as a tool into our teaching and research, and there will be winners and losers of all that, and that's just going to be a process that's going to play out over several years. I'm not sure about how much demand there would be for a degree that was essentially AI-created content that students are able to access at will online at a very low cost. That sounds like what you're proposing. Now, there are universities that already offer online curriculum at very low cost online. I would look at them and see how much demand is there for those offerings. I mean, ASU already offers massive online classes at relatively low cost.
It's considered a tier 1 program.
Yeah, the question is, are people going to want to switch from something like ASU or another online offering to the AI offering? I honestly don't know. My suspicion is that they're not. And if they do, then all the problems that we have associated with various education technologies and online learning are just going to be more acute at the AI university, right? That we have problems with retention, we have problems with completion, we have problems with student outcomes because there's just not the same face-to-face follow-up with students and assessment of students, which I think is massively important. So I'm not saying there's not a place for it. There's obviously a place for it in higher ed. Where how it shakes out is still to be determined. But you can really let the marketplace determine how much people are going to want to pay for an online degree, an online AI-driven degree. And I think you'll find out pretty quick. You could set it up. I'm pretty sure ASU could probably set it up really fast. If ASU wanted to do it, they could probably set it up really fast. I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of already have run the numbers at ASU and know how much demand there is for it. And you would probably find out pretty fast how much demand there is for an AI-driven degree.
I don't think the specific should be driven by the governor's office. I don't think it's something that is appropriate for the governor per se to be in the business of creating a college degree and marketing it. But I do believe that, picking up on Henry's last point, that there's things that could be done to increase competition in higher education. A few years ago, the legislature permitted our community colleges to get into the business of granting 4-year degrees. It's still highly restrictive. The community colleges have been very slow, moving very cautiously into the arena. But if you were to lift the current restrictions and get the Board of Regents out of the business of trying to prevent overlap and competition between the 3 research universities, and instead encourage competition, and I structurally would achieve that result by transferring the monies that are appropriated to the 3 research universities from the state legislature into scholarships to individual students that would go wherever the student went and increase the competition among the research universities for Arizona-based students. And then if you had the community colleges more in the 4-year degree granting business, if a $99 AI-generated degree had value, it would be offered. But I don't think it is a decision for a governor to make. Increase competition within higher education. And if it's a good idea that has a market, as Henry indicated, it will get done. But if you have state government pick up the infrastructure cost of producing this thing and then marketing it, I mean, that's the kind of state intervention that I don't think will pay off or is appropriate.
I mean, it's really hard for the state to know what people want and what industry needs. 10 years ago, it takes a long time to set up a university. 10 years ago, if you had said Arizona's going to need hundreds or not thousands of really skilled, advanced semiconductor engineers, someone would have said, no, Intel isn't growing that fast. The fabrication plants in Arizona are not growing that fast. You don't need that many people. And yet here we are. We've had these huge investments from TSMC, and we probably do need a lot more people, right? And how could the government ever foresee the need for these things? I think that there has to be a structure in which the universities can respond. New universities can be founded. I think, to talk about an cheap AI degree, ASU already offers cheap degrees at massive scale. Is that really what's lacking in Arizona? I'm not so certain. It could be that what's needed in Arizona is a more elitist research university that is more expensive. Maybe there's demand for that. I don't know. The question is, we can't know until you allow these different institutions to set up and to vary their offerings to meet the market. And directing the public universities to do this, that, and the next thing is kind of the opposite of allowing that process to happen.
All right. Well, obviously, I take a different position on this. Here's my differing position. It is the role of a governor to create a goal, a moonshot. I agree. A governor shouldn't actively be marketing the degree or running the degree, but inspiring other people to get to the moonshot, I think makes a lot of sense. Trying to get people to recognize what's the problem here that we're dealing with. Problem is we have a lot of kids who are increasingly going to have a bigger problem being able to take on the debt that it takes to get a college diploma. And we have to find other ways. Part of that is creating moonshots. And the best moonshot is price, because price does matter. I love ASU Online. I've used ASU Online before it was called ASU Online. There's a huge value to it. What I can tell you is the cost of the ASU Online degree is pretty close to what it costs to get a regular degree. Not that far off. The universities may play a different role. I agree with you. Competition is a good way to do that, to create competition. But I think it's also important for a governor to set a goal in it. Now let's jump to housing real quick. On the housing issue, Henry, I disagree with you on the idea that a governor can't make a difference. I think a governor can make a huge difference. And I'll give you a couple of assets that I think that they have if you want to do it. First, Bob is spot on. This is an industry I've worked in, and we've done a show on it. We outlined what the actual costs were. We got the League of Cities so upset they demanded that they have somebody to come on and try to counter us, which they didn't do much countering on, but it didn't matter.
You guys were so radical that you made me friends with the League of Cities.
Yes,
I was the moderate, apparently. You cannot avoid the regulatory impact and the fee impact that are coming from cities. It is overly burdensome. When you go out and you try to build a house or a set of houses, it's not just the zoning, although the zoning matters, right? If you allow a higher density of homes, you're going to be able to lower the overall cost. It's also the permitting process, the amount of challenges that you face in the permitting processes. Oftentimes, people not knowing how to tell you to get to where you have to go. And then you have groups like mountain preserve overlays. You have overlays of historic homes. You have overlays. The list just goes on. And the complexity that they've created makes it very, very difficult to be able to build the amount of homes that we need in the time that we need. There's no doubt in my mind, though, you lower the cost if you begin to lower those regulations. We also have the state land department. State land department could play a role in this. There's obviously constitutional barriers that you have to worry about with the state land department. I've spent a lot of time looking at those issues, but the idea of building homes that are more affordable eventually becomes a market that's not only essential for young people, it's kind of essential for the state land department. They have a lot of land left. And if the goal is we're only going to sell to people who build the most expensive home so we get the most expensive land price, the answer is eventually you're not going to sell as much land. You're not going to get as much money because you're skipping a market that exists and that needs to be able to be suited. And the last thing that I would tell you on homes is there are new technologies that are coming up. This not mobile home, but the modular home industry where they transport homes in. They're cutting construction costs 20 to 30%. But they're facing a lot of rules and regulations as well. The transportation regulations by themselves are very complex. The regulations that they're facing internally to be able to make them work. But that's an industry that could have a huge effect on home building if you could mobilize them. And there are groups here, probably more groups here than most other places in the country where we could take advantage of it. At the local level,
most of these problems are being solved. Now, at the federal level, you can have effects on it, huge effects. Here's the first effect. If you keep spending massive amounts of money at the federal government level, running big, huge deficits, you're going to drive up interest rates, and that can kill anything that would make a difference that you could do locally. So I agree. Federal government is not helping on this. And then when they decide, well, what we're going to do is we're going to go out to these big guys who are buying homes, we're going to stop them. Well, I can promise you there are a lot of small builders who are building homes just for them. They're just going to stop building those homes. They're not going to build them to put them up for sale. There was a market they were selling them to. They were being rented. If you don't build them, if you build less homes, you're not going to fix this problem either. The arguments on the left are very ineffective at dealing with this. It seems like nationally we're kind of moving to the left. But the point I would give is there is a significant role that a governor and a state could play. And in fact, our governor and legislature have been at odds with one another on a variety of things on how to do that.
I found this a particularly disappointing part of the speech. There was lip service paid in the speech to reducing regulation that is impinging on the supply side of the equation. But I think it was 2 sessions ago, the legislature passed a bill largely deregulating home construction in Arizona. Katie Hobbs vetoed it. If you want to provide credibility on this issue, you say, send me that bill, I will sign it. He didn't say that. And what he did say was that in some undisclosed way, he was going to create cost savings in the Empowerment Scholarship account program and move it to what he described as a merit-based approach. I have no idea what a merit-based approach to vouchers would consist of. And it completely violates the principles of school choice, which is the government doesn't decide merit. Merit is decided by the choices, the free choices that parents and students make as to where to enroll their kids. And he says he's going to take that savings and he's going to make it vouchers, subsidize down payments, which is something that Katie Hobbs is doing. She has been able to get additional funding from the legislature into the Housing Trust Fund to try to subsidize down payment and reduce costs. That's dealing with it on the demand side. So I thought that was particularly troublesome, both in what he didn't say, which is I will sign that kind of legislation, and what he did say, which is that he's going to go, there's lots of room for reform in the ESA program. Trying to transform it into a merit-based approach undermines the whole purpose of but then you're not going to save much money. I mean, what Hobbs has proposed in terms of ESA reform, she estimates would raise $90 million. You're not going to get money out of that program to in any way meaningfully subsidize down payments for first-time homeowners. And the state land proposal, I mean, you have a constitutional requirement that go to the highest bidder. You would be violating the Constitution if you attempted to set aside some state land only for a particular type of housing product.
Actually, Bob, again, I spent some time on this one. I think there are legal avenues to be able to utilize the state land department if you can show that there's a market that is necessary. I mean, imagine this. If, again, your only goal was to get the single highest price, I can tell you the model. A home sells at about, the land price, including the road and infrastructure built on top of it, sell for about 25% of the value of a home. So theoretically, if the only thing you were looking at is, well, I want the highest priced home, which is going to give me the highest value, that would result in them building only the most expensive homes. Well, still, that doesn't happen completely. There are a lot of upper middle class homes coming out in state land department land. Why does that happen? Oh, because you change density. You change the formula for how many homes are used on a per acre basis. You can change. And by the way, then what city it's being annexed in matters, because then it's about setbacks. Well, you can have a higher density, but if you still create big setbacks from the front yard, side yard, backyard, you begin to have an effect on how much lot coverage you can get. There are lots of things that you can do within that help you get to a lower priced home. Now, the question is, can you provide an incentive? Meaning you say to a developer, we're going to price this as if you were going to build a lower priced home, but we're going to place some type of incentive on it that if you don't do that, we end up being able to claw some money back. Now, that may have to go back to the voters to be able to look at. That there will be a larger policy that's going to come out in the next couple of days that you can look at. But we talk about a lot of the issues that you spoke about here. Henry, you want to make another comment on this?
Well, I think what Bob's pointing out about the proposed use of the ESA funds for the home subsidies is just an example of just a lot of details not being totally clear from this initial statement, which I think is normal for a candidate just starting out. I think the state land trust issue is a major one, but in order to make it legible and understandable for voters, maybe he should come out and say, I'm going to force the state land trust to allow so and so many homes to be built in this place. Now, I don't know whether that's legal or not, but it would certainly make for a great political slogan, and it would make for a great photo op if he could stand in front of the construction workers breaking ground, etc. A lot of the stuff about regulations, I totally agree with you, Paul, but I'm not entirely sure that you really made the case that it's really tractable for a governor. It could be that the bill that Bob was talking about, that literally he could say, I will sign that bill and it will solve the problems. But what you talked about were just many, many, many little regulations that added up are really bad for developers and people trying to build houses. It increases the cost, but they're different across every city. They're different across the counties. I think it's hard for a governor to change all those things. So that's what makes me wary of that particular issue.
Yeah, and there's no doubt it is harder, but I can tell you, even in places like California, they're seeing big changes on those regulations. You can create changes. I think Bob is right. I think there was an opportunity here to say, send me that bill, I would have signed it. I agree with that. I think actually Hugh would have agreed with that. That's a missed line that could have been in this speech. It's not just the stick that you can use. You can also use the carrot, right? You know what the X prize is. You could create a prize for cities to say, okay, here's what we're going to work on to try to reduce the amount of time that it takes you to issue a permit. Now, there are lots of ways that they try to get around it, but you could create a system where they're being judged and incentivized, and potentially a private sector prize for the city that comes up with the best process for entry-level homes to be able to be processed and go through the regulatory system. I know many people who work at the city level. They're pretty creative when they're challenged, when they're pushed. Today, what most of them would tell you is, hey, we're just enforcing the rules and it's difficult to enforce them. Can also tell you, a DSD director, city managers do this all the time. City managers say the job of the DSD director, the developmental services director, is to work for the other departments to implement what it is that they need implemented, whether it's sanitation or streets or fire or whoever else, not to treat the community that's trying to develop the homes like a customer, not to trying to find a way that's more effective at pushing permits through the system. And the challenge to that is that becomes a bureaucratic maze that's difficult to get through. All right, let me hit this last issue that was in the speech. And I'll just do a little bit of a framework. Not all of this is in the speech, but I think you'll see it in the policy that comes up in the next couple of days. The issue of schools. You talked about ESAs, but I think Hugh's look at this is that what we have today is over the last 10 years, traditional schools have lost about 100,000 kids. Now, some of that came about because childbirth is just slower than it once was. But a big portion of it came because parents decided to leave the system and go to charters or go to a voucher or go to a private school as those options came up. Now, there are two ways that you can approach that. One way is create a limitation and say, we're just not going to let that happen. The other way is to say, no, we want to give parents those choices. But in giving parents those choices, we also want to try to figure out a way to make the existing traditional school better. And while we're focused on the choices, we're not really doing a lot to focus on the traditional schools. We're seeing a large amount of school closures that are having to take place. So the idea is, could you come up with compacts between parents and teachers in local traditional schools to allow them to take their local schools and make them more of a charter-like environment? We already have these councils that we formed, but the councils really have had no teeth, no ability to be effective. The second issue that we think is important, and I agree with this, there has to be some accountability. And I'm going to go to the voucher system, and one of the things that bothers me is if you have a set of parents with 5 kids and you give them $7,000 a kid to homeschool them, some parents are just going to see that as a subsidy, as a way to be able to educate their kids at home and be able to keep the money or to utilize it for things that they shouldn't be utilizing it for. My answer in this is, I want to make the traditional school accountable. I think Hugh wants to make them accountable. I think charter should be accountable. I don't think that charter should be more accountable than the public school system is. And I don't think today that the traditional schools, there's a lot of accountability inside of them in terms of outcomes. But I also feel the same way personally about vouchers, which is we ought to make certain that if we're giving parents choices, that we are improving the outcomes amongst kids. And that, to me, that seems to be an argument that we don't spend enough time talking about.
Well, I do believe that there needs to be some reforms in the ESA system. And I think it begins with the homeschoolers, because that is where most of the abuses are occurring. And rather than create this system where the parents can decide what is educationally relevant and then seek reimbursement to it, and you're trying to approve after the fact all of these many decisions. I think a new deal needs to be struck with homeschoolers where you say the state will pay for these things, period, and have pre-approved textbooks, pre-approved curriculum, pre-approved enhancements, and maps and things like that. And to say you can choose any of these things that the state approves in advance, which eliminates the after the fact attempt to try to prevent abuses of the system. And I think that is a necessary reform. I also believe that voucher students, most of the money and most of the kids go to a private school. So it's just the state writes a check that ends up in the coffers of the private school. There's not an abuse that occurs, and these private schools do a very good job of education. But I do believe that voucher students should take the same accountability tests that the students in district schools and charter schools take. We should, taxpayers, for the amount of money that they're spending, should know what kind of education these kids are getting. And that's the system that we have devised. My history on this is very dusty, even though I was part of it at the time. But many years ago, there was legislation that permitted district schools to become more charter-like. And there was virtually no uptake in it. In fact, I don't think there was any uptake of it. So I'm not sure that that's a reform. I think you have a district world, you got a charter world, and you got a private school world, and you got a homeschooled world. And I don't think that, I think those are going to remain distinct approaches. But we can, I think, through accountability through testing, and our tests are terrible, just absolutely terrible. I mean, we have a situation where people aren't happy with the kind of education our kids are getting, but 80-90% of our schools are rated A or B schools. That just does not compute. So I do believe that there's reform there, but I don't know that there's going to be a lot of walking through that opportunity that is created. And I'm in favor of that opportunity existing. I think that it's accountability through testing and parental choice that gets you improved education over time.
Yeah, and I think in the traditional schools, by the way, I think there are many traditional schools that are doing a fine job, but it's obvious there are a lot that are doing a poor job. So when I look at why people leave, I would start by telling you it's safety. I can walk you into schools where safety is a problem, and you will see that it's also a problem for enrollment. The idea that you have codes of conduct, that you have that, in some cases, school uniforms, those things can make an incredible difference in the process. Giving teachers control over their classroom, that can make an incredible difference. But that comes in challenges with especially federal funding on things like the no student left behind issue, which charter schools don't have as much of a problem with, but traditional schools have been incredibly challenged dealing with what are oftentimes called special needs kids, of which there are some, but oftentimes some of them, or at least sometimes, their behavioral problems instead, trying to find a way to allow those schools to have more autonomy and to not have to be as rigorous as the traditional school is, but yet giving them some tools to help them deal with accountability, to help them deal with school safety, to help them deal with codes of conduct, all of which the charter schools do a better job of. And again, my answer then would be, when you have schools that are failing, I think we ought to be stepping out to the great hearts of the world and the bases of the world. I find not all charters are the same. There are some charters that are doing pretty bad jobs as well, right? But our school system is performing at best kind of somewhere in the middle level, at best. But we have some charter schools that are performing the best, not just in the country, but in the world. And we ought to be trying to find a way to figure out, how do we export some of those standards? I'm not sure how to do it, but I can tell you that people at Great Hearts and Basis have had ideas, because I've listened to them talk about what you could do in traditional schools that would make a difference. I just think we have to do a better job in all schools, because one of the challenges for charters is transportation. Not everybody can deal with the transportational challenges that exist with them. But if we could make our traditional schools follow more of that model, or even allow some of the charter schools who are doing a good job to take them over, I think we could begin to be transformative.
I think that the schools that are losing enrollment and are considering closing down their schools should be allowed to do things with them to raise money for their schools. Like, they should be allowed to convert them into office buildings or rent them out to other schools, for example. But I think that they should be forced to offer them to independent and charter school providers first. I think that the school facilities that have been paid for with public funds to provide education to local kids should be used for that purpose in the first order, even if the organization that's offering the education to the kids is not necessarily the local school district. So if you have a school closing down, for example, here in Tempe or in Scottsdale because there's not enough enrollments, I think that the school district should, by law, be forced to open that up at a reasonable lease to independent school operators who might be able to use the facilities and the sports grounds and all that stuff before they're allowed to shut it down completely, let alone do anything else for it. And I think that would inject some growth into some of these areas, because the danger is that we start to have sort of school deserts where there's no good schools or no schools at all. And I think that to prevent that from happening, that we could force the district schools to use their facilities more creatively.
Last issue, Bob, I just want to talk to you about this concept with you, and that's what we see happening in Minneapolis this week. What I find first, we've watched these videos twice in a row now, and I'll give you kind of some of my thoughts on them. But I do believe that what we're seeing here is exactly why an independent candidacy could become more important. It is incredibly obvious to me that these two sides cannot work with one another. They're so bent on trying to destroy the other side that it's hard to decipher as I listen to them. Where are they actually trying to promote good public policy? And where are they just trying to make certain they're sticking a finger in the other guy's eye? And I mean that for both sides. I don't mean that for one side. In my experience, I've dealt with lots of shootings that have happened as mayor and working on these types of topics. I've said this in the past. In my experience, of the times that I thought the officer was wrong, if you waited for the report, about 80% of the time, that officer was right. But if you're going to wait for the report, you have to wait for the report, right? If you tell people, look, we're going to take a look at this, we're going to have people examine it. When we get done with the examination, when we get done taking a look at it, we'll give you an answer. If you don't do that as mayor with your police department, then it's not credible. Everybody just thinks you're fixing the report. They think you're just creating a report that you want. On the other hand, when the mayor and governor, in this particular case, take shots at it, thinking that just because I saw the video, I know what's happening, my answer is you don't know all the details of what's happening. So I start with even their original approach, I think, is incorrect. Now, I'm watching tactics here that are worrisome to me at the federal level. I think some of the tactics that are being utilized are not going to be effective at dealing with inner city issues. I'm also concerned when I start hearing like their training days were dropped to 47, and the reason they used 47 was to reflect the 47th president. That's not a good way to set the amount of time that your people need to be able to work on issues to make certain that they know how to operate inside of an urban area. But as I listen to both the governor and to the president, my own personal feeling is they're both making this worse. I honestly would put more blame on the president, but I don't give much credit to the governor and the mayor in this one either. I think they're doing things that are exacerbating the problem more than it needs to be. Give me your thoughts, if you would, on this. How do you see what's happening there?
I would begin with where I think the American people are, which is that the enforcement activities and approach of the Trump administration don't match who we want to be as a country, and they're deeply disturbing. So if you are an opposition politician, what do you do about that? And in general, I would agree with you about both sides sharing blame for the polarization. And I do believe that it creates an opportunity for an independent candidate, as we've discussed, to say we need a different way. This isn't working for our country. This isn't working for our state. And I've not watched the videos. I just can't bring myself to watch a human being being killed when I know that that's the outcome, that it's a real human being. It's not a TV drama. It's real stuff. But in reading the reporting of people who have watched the video, it is just at odds with what the Trump administration rushed to characterize it as. And particularly in the most recent incident. So I believe a degree of outrage by a governor or a mayor about this being done in their home, their place, where they've been elected to be responsible for, I would create a little bit more slack for this particular incident and the reaction to it. However, more broadly speaking, I think your analysis is right on. Both the Republicans and the Democrats in this country now are more interested in scoring political talking points than they are successful governing. And that does not reflect what the body politic wants, either in the nation as a whole or the state. So I do believe that sort of gets accentuated by what's happening in Minneapolis and does create a better prospect for an independent candidate in 2026 to say these politics aren't working and they're not who we are. We need something different. We need something better, something more optimistic, as some might say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the idea that Secretary Noem immediately said this was a domestic terrorist both times, it's not only ridiculous. There's no way you could know. You couldn't possibly know the first minute a shooting happened. But what that says is that they're following a policy that says we're going to defend these guys no matter what. Well, who's going to believe your report then? You're writing the report. Who's going to believe any of the data that come out, no matter how factual it is? They're going to believe that you're cited on it. I also believe that the vitriol between the two groups is so high that neither one of them either trusts one another, neither one of them want to work with one another, and both of them want to hurt the other side. In fact, I think that's driving this policy more than anything else. I think what an independent can offer is to focus less on being right and more on healing. Right? How do you try to understand where the other side is coming from? How do you try to find common ground? How do you try to make certain that you're not diminishing the person on the other side, however much you may disdain some of the things they're saying or they're doing, but to grant them some type of credibility so there's a possibility of keeping people safe on the streets? And right now, I just don't see that there's any incentive by either side to work together. Again, personally, I'm watching this. I think what the administration is doing is way off base. I just think it's way off base. But I also, and in saying that, I agree with you that if I were the mayor, I'd be terrified if I were the mayor and they were going to bring in ICE today and watching what's taking place, because I just know this is going to be a disaster. It doesn't matter almost what we do. It doesn't matter how hard we try. We have people who aren't being trained long enough. They're being told that it's that in fact that they're going to be supported no matter what. In every department, you always have a few bad apples. I don't care how good you train your department, you always have them. And you're empowering that group and you're kind of silencing the other group in that process. So as a mayor and a governor, I'd be terrified if they were coming in. I think the public knows that because the polling is showing that the public doesn't support this at all. But I think the role that that I would like to see played by an independent is to try to understand where both sides are coming from, give them some sense of affirmation so that maybe you can try to find a more peaceful solution than what's happening. Because what happened in the last week is it isn't something that it should happen in the United States of America, in my opinion.
I think you don't necessarily need to appease the politicos on both sides, because they're playing the game the way that they're rewarded to play the game, in the way that our primary nominating system serves. But I believe there's a plurality of the body politic that wants something different, wants something more constructive, wants something better. And I think appealing to that broader plurality is, in these circumstances, the path to potential success for independent candidates.
All right, Bob. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you being on the show here today, and we will see you over the next couple of weeks as all this evolves.
You bet. Good luck.
All right.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.